Looking at the current tensions between Iran and Israel, it's hard to imagine that, in the past, Jews and Persians once shared a deep and complex relationship. Alongside that history are countless mysteries that still linger between these two peoples from ancient times. What are those mysteries? Join us as we uncover them in today's video. Cyrus the Great sets the Jews free. In 539 BC, an event occurred that would change the fate of the entire Middle East. It was when Cyrus the Great, the founding king of the Persian Empire, marched into Babylon and ended the rule of this once mighty empire over the land of Judah. For many Jews, this was the moment they had awaited during nearly half a century of exile in a foreign land. According to the book of Ezra in the Hebrew Bible, after coming to power, Cyrus issued an important decree. This decree allowed the Jews who had been exiled since the time of Nebuchadnezzar II in 587 BC to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the Second Temple. This event ignited a new hope for the revival of their nation after so many years of displacement. Records in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah both mention the number 42,360 people who returned. This figure paints an emotional picture of a great multitude making their way home. However, when we look more closely at archaeological evidence and modern historical research, questions arise about the plausibility of this number. Before Babylon's conquest, the Kingdom of Judah had a population of only about 100,000 to 150,000. When Nebuchadnezzar carried out the exile, only a small portion of the population was actually forced to leave, mainly the elite, such as nobles, priests, and craftsmen. According to Babylonian sources, the total number of Jews exiled may have been only between 10,000 and 20,000. After nearly half a century living in Babylon, that number would have naturally grown to some extent, but it is still hard to believe that over 40,000 people would suddenly decide to leave a place where they had settled and become comfortable, especially since many had already assimilated and no longer considered Jerusalem their true home. Archaeological evidence in Jerusalem and the region of Yehud shows that this area remained sparsely populated at the end of the 6th century BC. Ramat Rahel, a prominent archaeological site, indicates that Yehud at that time was just a small province with a population of about 10,000 to 20,000 people. When the Second Temple was completed in 516 BC, the province's total population still showed no dramatic increase. If indeed more than 42,000 people had returned from Babylon, they would have made up a large portion of the population, something that would have put significant strain on Yehud's already limited resources. This only strengthens the belief among researchers that the number given in the book of Ezra is likely symbolic. In Jewish tradition, large numbers were often used to emphasize the religious meaning of an event and to highlight God's favor, rather than to reflect an exact historical tally. For instance, the number 40 in the Bible typically represents trials and fulfillment, not always a literal figure. It is also possible that the number 42,360 did not refer solely to Jews from Judah, but may have included other groups who had once lived in Mesopotamia. During the exile, the Jewish community lived alongside other peoples, such as Babylonians, Samaritans, and those deported from the northern kingdom of Israel. Some among these groups may have converted to Judaism or married into Jewish families, making the returning group to Jerusalem far more diverse than before. On the other hand, the decree of Cyrus, as recorded on the Cyrus cylinder, did not mention the Jews specifically, but included all peoples exiled by Babylon. Thus, the wave of returnees may have been a mixed procession of many ethnicities, including people who were not of Jewish descent but saw an opportunity to resettle in Yehud. As for Cyrus's true motivation in issuing this decree, ancient sources, such as the Cyrus cylinder, show that he chose a policy of unusual tolerance for the ancient world. Cyrus wanted to allow exiled peoples to return to their homelands, thereby strengthening their loyalty to the Achaemenid Empire. Even so, the Cyrus cylinder does not mention the Jews or specify any number of returnees, nor do administrative records from the empire provide concrete figures about the scale of these migrations. Nevertheless, archaeological remains in Jerusalem indicate a clear increase in construction activity at the end of the 6th century BC, in line with the return of a significant group of people. Although the truth behind the number 42,360 remains debated, no one can deny the symbolic and historical significance of this return for the Jewish people. This homecoming, though likely far smaller in scale than what is recorded in the Bible, still marks a crucial turning point. ushering in a new era of rebuilding and affirming Jewish identity after years of exile. The Jews in Persia. How did they integrate? After Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon and issued the decree allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, not everyone chose the path of return. In reality, many Jews decided to remain in Persia, a land where they and their families had become rooted over generations since the days of exile. Major cities like Susa, the administrative capital of the empire, or Ecbatana, became centers for the largest Jewish communities. The Book of Esther describes Jewish life in Susa in vivid detail. Esther herself became queen to King Xerxes I, while Mordecai held a position within the imperial administration, demonstrating that the Jews had truly integrated and played an active role in the social and political life of Persia. Despite living within a diverse culture, the Jews in Persia continued to preserve their religious identity. They remained faithful to the Torah, strictly observed major festivals such as Passover, and established synagogues as spiritual centers for their communities. One key reason the Jews were able to maintain their faith and traditions was thanks to the policy of tolerance practiced by the Achaemenid Empire. Unlike many other empires of the era, Persia allowed the peoples within its vast territory to keep their own beliefs without forcing assimilation. This enabled the Jews to practice their religion freely, while also adapting to the economic and social life of Persian society. An interesting question arises: did prolonged contact with Persian culture influence the beliefs of the Jews? Persian Zoroastrianism worshipped the god Ahura Mazda and emphasized doctrines, highlighting the opposition between good and evil, while Judaism during this period was also developing a strong tradition of monotheism. Some scholars suggest that living alongside Persians may have contributed to the formation of certain concepts in later Jewish texts. For example, the idea of guardian angels, which was common in Zoroastrianism, began to appear more frequently in Jewish writings after the exile. Nevertheless, the Jews maintained their belief in Yahweh as the one and only God, and they avoided direct syncretism. Cultural exchanges were usually limited to areas such as adopting the Persian calendar or marriage customs, and did not blur the core of their faith. In terms of political roles, the Book of Esther recounts that Mordecai once held an important position under King Xerxes I. To this day, however, there is no archaeological evidence or Persian historical record to confirm the truth of this story. Even so, administrative documents from the Achaemenid dynasty indicate that Persia was a multi-ethnic empire where many groups, including Jews, could participate in governance or the military, though they were rarely mentioned by name. Looking back on this entire process, it can be said that the Jews in Persia successfully integrated into their new society without losing their identity. They took part in the economic and social life, and at times even the political affairs of the empire, while still upholding their traditional values through the Torah and their distinctive religious practices. Jews in the Persian army, fact or fiction? Throughout the period from the 6th to the 4th centuries BC, the Achaemenid Empire was one of the largest multi-ethnic empires of the ancient world. Under Persian rule, many different peoples lived and worked together across various provinces, including the Jewish community. The question of whether Jews ever served in the Persian army remains one of the mysteries that continues to intrigue historians. Some historical sources suggest that Jews may have taken part in the imperial army, especially in western provinces such as Egypt and Phoenicia. There are even those who propose that they may have served as mercenaries during the territorial expansion campaigns of the Persian kings. However, when examining official Persian records as well as accounts in the Hebrew Bible, no direct evidence has been found to confirm the Jews' role as regular soldiers. For this reason, the issue continues to be debated among historians. The clearest archaeological evidence for the participation of Jews in the Persian army comes from Elephantine, an island on the Nile River in southern Egypt. Here, in the 5th century BC, there was a unique Jewish community. Aramaic language documents discovered at Elephantine record that Jews there served as a military unit tasked with guarding the border fortress for the Persian Empire. They were often referred to as the Jewish garrison and held the responsibility of protecting Persian interests against threats from Nubia. These documents reveal that Jewish soldiers received salaries from the empire, were granted land for settlement, and even maintained their own temple for the worship of Yahweh. This shows that they served Persian interests while also striving to preserve their religious identity. However, these texts do not clarify whether they only held garrison duties or also participated in larger military campaigns. Aside from the unique case of Elephantine, there is no archaeological or historical evidence confirming the presence of Jews in the Persian military elsewhere. Greek sources, such as Herodotus, often listed numerous ethnic groups as part of the Persian army, but never mentioned Jews. Even the Hebrew Bible does not focus on a military role for Jews, but instead recounts how Persian kings supported the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the preservation of Jewish cultural identity. This suggests that if Jews did serve in the Persian army, their involvement was likely limited to local duties rather than being a major part of the imperial military machine. Some scholars argue that, at times, the military role of Jews in the Persian Empire has been exaggerated or misunderstood. Large communities, such as those in Babylon or Susa, were primarily engaged in trade, agriculture, or administration, and rarely participated in large-scale military activities. The absence of evidence outside of Elephantine indicates that Jews were not a key force in the Achaemenid army, but instead integrated into the multi-ethnic society in other ways. The Book of Esther. Fiction or historical truth? The Book of Esther is one of the most prominent and controversial stories in the Hebrew Bible. According to its narrative, Esther was a young Jewish woman who became queen to King Xerxes, known as Ahasuerus in the Old Testament. With the support of her uncle Mordecai, Esther exposed a sinister plot by Haman, a high-ranking official in the royal court. Haman had planned to annihilate all Jews living within the Persian Empire. However, thanks to Esther's courage and resourcefulness, this plot was foiled. Haman was executed, and the Jewish people were saved. The story concludes with a resounding victory for the Jews and the establishment of Purim, a major festival that is still celebrated to this day. However, from a historical perspective, many scholars have questioned the authenticity of this story. There are no ancient Persian sources from the Achaemenid period that confirm the existence of Esther, Mordecai, or Haman. Administrative records, archaeological findings, and even Greek historical accounts make no mention of any events or figures related to the story of Esther. Furthermore, many elements in the book are characteristic of a fable, such as a genocidal plot on an enormous scale, or the total victory of the Jews over a formidable power. For this reason, quite a few researchers believe that the Book of Esther is largely a product of imagination or a religious legend. It may have been composed in the 4th or 3rd century BC after the Achaemenid Empire, with the aim of strengthening the unity of the Jewish community as they faced new threats from other empires. Even so, the fact that the Book of Esther sets its story in the Persian royal court is not a coincidence. The Achaemenid Empire was known for its policy of religious tolerance and for allowing peoples within its realm to maintain their own cultural identities. Details in the book describing the palace at Susa and Persian court customs are entirely consistent with what archaeologists have found at Persepolis and other sites. This suggests that the author of Esther had a deep understanding of life in Persia, perhaps based on the collective memory of Jews who once lived there, or from stories passed down through generations. The choice to make King Xerxes I a central figure may have been intended to emphasize the perseverance and resilience of the Jews when confronted with a powerful ruler. If we view the Book of Esther as a work of fiction, it still reflects the complex relationship between Jews and Persians. The Achaemenid period was a time when Jewish communities in Susa and Babylon were protected and prospered. Yet they could not escape a lingering sense of unease while living in a multi-ethnic empire with many potential dangers. The story of Esther may have served as a way for the Jewish people to reinforce their identity, highlighting the power of faith, loyalty, and unity. The tomb of Queen Esther and Mordecai in Hamadan. In the heart of Hamadan, Iran, an ancient tomb has quietly endured the passage of time. Many believe that this is the final resting place of Queen Esther and her uncle Mordecai, two central figures from the Book of Esther in the Hebrew Bible. The story of Esther is not only familiar to the Jewish people, but has also left a deep mark on Western culture. According to tradition, Esther was a Jewish woman who became queen to the Persian king Ahasuerus. With her intelligence and courage, and with the help of her uncle Mordecai, she saved her people from destruction at the hands of a sinister plot. This tomb stands in the center of Hamadan, a city that was once Ecbatana, the capital of the ancient Persian Empire. The current structure is modest, featuring a single dome and Hebrew inscriptions decorating the interior. Upon entering, visitors see two stone graves lying side by side. For generations, Jews have believed these to be the tombs of Esther and Mordecai. Some ancient documents from the 14th century describe the site as an important pilgrimage destination, attracting Jews from distant lands who came to pray and honor their ancestors. However, as archaeologists and historians have examined the site more closely, questions about the authenticity of the tomb have gradually arisen. To this day, there is no archaeological evidence confirming with certainty that the remains of Esther and Mordecai are actually interred here. Many researchers believe that the tomb's current architecture dates to the medieval period, at least 1,000 years after the era of Esther and Mordecai. This suggests that the tomb may be largely symbolic, constructed to reinforce the tradition and religious faith of the Jewish community living in Persia at the time. In addition, some theories propose that the tomb may actually be linked to Shushandukt, a Jewish queen who married the Sassanid king Yazdegerd I in the 5th century AD. If true, this structure would be even less directly related to Esther and Mordecai than many have long believed. The absence of Persian-era artifacts or inscriptions only deepens the mystery and controversy surrounding this tomb. Despite the uncertainty about its true origin, the tomb of Esther and Mordecai still holds profound spiritual significance for Jews around the world. It is not just a place to remember two legendary figures, but also a symbol of resilience and triumph over adversity. Every year, especially during the festival of Purim, hundreds of Jews still gather here to read the Book of Esther, to pray, and to revisit the ancient story. However, the political climate in Iran in recent years has made pilgrimages to the tomb increasingly difficult. Some reports say that the site has even been vandalized, raising concerns about the preservation of this unique cultural heritage. Researchers continue to ask a fundamental question. If this is not the tomb of Esther and Mordecai, then who built it, and for what purpose? Some scholars believe that the medieval Jewish community chose Hamadan because it had once been a center of power in the Persian Empire, the very backdrop for Esther's story. To this day, modern methods such as LiDAR scanning or chemical analysis have not been applied, largely due to political and cultural barriers, making excavation and research at the site nearly impossible. While the ultimate answer to the tomb's origins remains elusive, this monument endures as a testament to the power of memory and faith. History sometimes lives on through stories and legends passed down through the generations. The Second Temple, Persia's true role in its construction. According to the books of Ezra and Nehemiah in the Old Testament, the return of the Jews and the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem are closely tied to the names of three Persian kings: Cyrus the Great, Darius I, and Artaxerxes I. After conquering Babylon in 539 BC, Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple that had previously been destroyed. Following him, Darius I not only reaffirmed this decree, but also provided additional resources, helping the Jews overcome many disputes with neighboring communities. In the time of Artaxerxes I, Nehemiah was permitted to return to Jerusalem to reinforce the city's defensive walls. These accounts portray the Persian kings as generous patrons, even granting tax exemptions for major Jewish projects. In reality, however, the process of building the Second Temple spanned several decades and was often interrupted by strong opposition from groups such as the Samaritans. For this reason, some modern scholars have questioned the extent of Persia's actual support for this project. When comparing archaeological evidence and sources outside the Bible, the picture of Persia's role becomes more complex. The Cyrus Cylinder confirms his policy of religious tolerance, but makes no mention of the construction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. Administrative documents from Persepolis show that Persia did support religious projects in its provinces, but mainly as a way to maintain the loyalty of local populations to the empire. Archaeological evidence in Jerusalem, such as traces of major construction from the 6th century BC, indicates that the Jews did receive some material support from Persia. However, the actual scale of this support likely consisted of limited aid, such as supplying timber from Lebanon and ensuring legal protection, rather than the comprehensive sponsorship described in the Old Testament. Persia's role, therefore, was perhaps closer to that of a coordinator and legal guarantor rather than a lavish benefactor. Politically, supporting the Jews in rebuilding the Second Temple was part of a broader strategy to control the empire's western provinces. Judah, where Jerusalem was located, lay along key trade routes and bordered Egypt. By allowing the Jews to restore their religious center, Persia could reinforce loyalty in a border region, turning Judah into a stable buffer zone. Supporting the Jews also allowed Persia to balance troublesome groups such as the Samaritans and to manage regional conflicts more effectively. This approach was in stark contrast to Persia's harsh measures against rebellions in Egypt, where independence movements were ruthlessly suppressed for threatening central authority. The policy of allowing the temple's reconstruction also fit with the spirit of tolerance characteristic of the Achaemenid Empire. Unlike many other ancient empires, Persia often encouraged subject peoples to preserve their own cultures and religions, thereby reducing the risk of local resistance. Even so, Persia maintained close supervision through a system of provincial governors, ensuring that religious centers like the Jerusalem Temple did not become symbols of extreme nationalism. It is possible that the Old Testament exaggerated the role of the Persian kings to emphasize the idea that God had used them to protect and guide the Jews through one of the most difficult periods in their history. In summary, the Persian Empire did indeed support the Jews in rebuilding the Second Temple, but this support primarily came in the form of legal protection and limited resources, rather than the absolute generosity described in the Bible. Persia's role in this story reflects a flexible strategy, one that encouraged local religious practices while maintaining careful control to safeguard imperial power. Nehemiah and the Walls of Jerusalem, the backing of Artaxerxes. Looking back at the history of the Near East in the mid-5th century BC, we find a remarkable story tied to the name of Nehemiah. He was a Jew living during a time when his people endured exile, while Jerusalem itself lay in ruins, devastated by the Babylonian conquest. At that time, Nehemiah served at the Persian court as cupbearer to King Artaxerxes I, a position of both honor and trust, reflecting the king's deep confidence in him. According to the book of Nehemiah, when Nehemiah learned that Jerusalem had not yet been restored, he became deeply concerned for the fate of his homeland. He decided to request permission from Artaxerxes to return to Jerusalem and lead the effort to rebuild its walls. Surprisingly, not only did the king grant his request, but he also provided Nehemiah with special letters of authority and resources, such as timber and other necessary materials to help him complete his mission. Upon returning to Jerusalem, Nehemiah faced many challenges. The area was home not only to Jews, but also to other groups, such as Samaritans and Ammonites. These communities regarded the wall reconstruction with suspicion, and at times, they even tried to obstruct and threaten the project. Nevertheless, thanks to Nehemiah's determination and the support from the king's letters and resources, he was able to rally many Jews to work tirelessly together. The book of Nehemiah emphasizes that, despite continuous difficulties from both outside and within the community, the entire wall of Jerusalem was rebuilt in just 52 days. This reconstruction not only helped defend the city, but also restored the Jews' sense of pride and faith in themselves. When analyzing Artaxerxes' motivation for approving the project, many historians suggest it was part of a larger imperial strategy. At that time, Persia faced numerous threats from Egypt, which was plagued by recurring uprisings, as well as from the Greek city-states after prolonged wars. Yehud province, where Jerusalem stood, lay along vital trade routes and bordered Egypt, so reinforcing Jerusalem meant securing and controlling a strategic area. Furthermore, Jews had a reputation for loyalty when treated fairly, so Artaxerxes may have sought to grant them a certain standing as a counterbalance to opposing groups like the Samaritans. Even so, the king maintained strict control by appointing Nehemiah as governor of Yehud, ensuring all activities in Jerusalem remained under Persian oversight. He was also careful not to let the wall become a symbol of independence or separatism. Today, archaeological evidence in Jerusalem shows traces of building activity dating precisely to the 5th century BC. While it is likely that the scale of the wall was not exactly as described in the book of Nehemiah, there was clearly a significant period of reconstruction in the city. Ancient Persian administrative records, particularly documents found at Persepolis, also confirm that the empire frequently supplied materials and resources to its provinces to maintain the loyalty of diverse communities. However, it is notable that no official Persian documents have yet been found that mention Nehemiah by name or specifically refer to the wall project in Jerusalem. This has led many scholars to question the absolute accuracy of some details in the book of Nehemiah. Some researchers suggest the book may have been written at the end of the 5th century BC and that many of its events were exaggerated or embellished to glorify Nehemiah's leadership and God's protection of the Jewish people. There are those who believe the entire story of Nehemiah is, in fact, a work of religious and political propaganda meant to inspire the Jews after the exile. After returning from Babylon, this community was divided, lacking confidence, and faced strong pressures to assimilate. Nehemiah's image served as a symbol to rekindle a spirit of unity among the Jews. Still, it was not unusual for Jews to hold important positions in the Persian government. as the Achaemenid Empire was well known for appointing local officials from many different ethnic groups. In summary, the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls under Nehemiah with the support of Artaxerxes reflects a unique period when politics, religion, and international power intersected in complex ways. Whether Nehemiah was a real leader or a symbolic figure created to inspire his people, his story continues to embody the enduring value of overcoming adversity and the Jewish desire for renewal. Rebellion in Yehud. Did it occur under Persian rule? When speaking of the Achaemenid Empire, people often think of kings such as Cyrus, Darius I, and Artaxerxes I, rulers renowned for their policy of tolerance, which allowed subject peoples to maintain their cultural identities and religious practices as a means of preserving stability across a vast empire. The province of Yehud, which included Jerusalem, was among those that benefited from this policy. Royal decrees supporting the Jews in rebuilding the Second Temple and restoring the city's walls helped Yehud to grow and remain peaceful. Yet, while major provinces like Egypt, Babylon, and Lydia all recorded uprisings against Persian rule, Yehud appears to show no evidence of large-scale resistance. This has led many scholars to question whether Yehud was truly as tranquil as it seems. To better understand the possibility of rebellion in Yehud, we need to look at the reality of this province in the 6th and 5th centuries BC. At that time, Yehud was a small province with a population of around 10 to 20,000 people, most of whom lived as farmers or small traders. Unlike Babylon or Egypt, Yehud lacked the military resources and economic strength to organize an uprising significant enough to draw the attention of the Persian court. Large-scale revolts in regions such as Egypt were often fueled by heavy taxation and deep resentment of foreign rule, especially during the tense period under Xerxes I in 486 BC. In contrast, the Jews of Yehud seemed primarily focused on rebuilding their community and temple, especially since they had received Persian support. The absence of evidence for major uprisings may reflect the reality that the Jews prioritized stability over confrontation with imperial power. However, not everyone agrees that Yehud was completely free of resistance. Some researchers suggest that small-scale revolts or secret plots may have taken place, but went unrecorded in official histories. Archaeological materials such as the Elephantine papyri indicate that, in Egypt, Jewish communities occasionally clashed with local populations, but there is no sign that they ever rebelled against Persia. In Yehud itself, the Book of Ezra records opposition from the Samaritans and neighboring peoples regarding the temple's reconstruction, but these were local disputes, not large-scale insurrections against the empire. Some also believe that during the time of Artaxerxes, when Nehemiah led the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls, there may have been discontent within the Jewish community over issues like taxation or military conscription, but such matters never escalated into organized resistance. In terms of governance, Persia demonstrated flexibility in its treatment of different provinces. In rebellious regions such as Egypt, the empire often resorted to military suppression, increased taxes, or replaced local officials to restore order. The Behistun inscription recounts how Darius I punished rebel leaders and reorganized administrative structures to re-establish control. However, there is no evidence that Yehud ever faced such harsh reprisals. Administrative records from Persepolis indicate that Yehud paid taxes and provided labor to the empire, but was not excessively exploited or tightly controlled. Archaeological evidence in Jerusalem shows that Yehud developed steadily under Persian rule. Construction remains from the 5th century BC indicate no signs of warfare or destruction caused by rebellion. Still, due to the lack of direct Persian documents relating to Yehud, it remains difficult to determine the extent of any minor internal conflicts within the province. The influence of the Jews in Susa, reality or exaggeration. Susa was a prominent administrative and cultural center under the reign of the Persian kings. Many Old Testament stories are set in Susa, such as the Book of Esther, which describes Esther's rise to queen and Mordecai's advancement to high office after saving their people from a genocidal plot. The Book of Nehemiah also records that Nehemiah was sent by the king from Susa to Jerusalem to lead the rebuilding of the city's ancient walls. These stories have led many to believe that the Jewish community in Susa was not only present, but also wielded significant influence at the Persian court. But does this truly reflect historical reality? Or is it an exaggeration intended to inspire the spirit of the Jewish people? To accurately assess the influence of the Jews in Susa, it is important to consider the broader context of the Achaemenid Empire. This was a multi-ethnic empire, drawing together many peoples into its administrative and economic systems. After the exile in Babylon, many Jews settled in major cities, including Susa, where they could engage in trade, agriculture, or hold local administrative roles. The Book of Esther describes a large Jewish community in Susa, but does not provide details about their actual numbers. Meanwhile, Persian documents, such as the inscriptions at Persepolis, record the names of many peoples working in the palace, but do not specifically mention Jews. This raises the question: how significant was the Jewish role in Susa, or has it been exaggerated to strengthen the religious identity of the post-exilic community? From an archaeological perspective, Susa has been extensively excavated. The site has yielded palaces and artifacts dating from the 6th to the 4th centuries BC. Some stone inscriptions document administrative activities, listing craftsmen and workers for the royal court, with frequent references to Elamites and Medes, but no clear designation for a Jewish community. Some scholars speculate the Jews in Susa may have been included under broader terms like Ebernari, meaning people from the Syria, Palestine region. While the Elephantine papyri from Egypt show that the Jewish community there was highly organized in both social and religious life, no similar archaeological evidence has been found for Susa, making it difficult to determine the size or influence of the community there. Despite the lack of clear evidence, several theories suggest that Jews in Susa may have played a role in the economy, particularly in trade and craftsmanship. The commercial experience gained during the Babylonian exile helped them to integrate and prosper in Susa, but it is likely that their political role has been exaggerated in biblical accounts. The highest positions in the Persian court, such as vizier or royal cupbearer, were typically held by noble Persian or Elamite families closely connected to the royal family. The idea of a Jew like Mordecai becoming vizier would have been extremely rare, even if not entirely impossible in theory. The absence of Jews in inscriptions or lists of officials from Susa may simply indicate that their community was not especially large, or that administrative documents have been lost over time. It is also possible that the authors of the Bible amplified the influence of the Jewish community in Susa to bolster optimism and faith in divine protection during a challenging period. Cultural exchange in art and architecture under the Achaemenids. From the 6th to the 4th century BC, the Achaemenid Empire became a crossroads for the great cultures of the ancient world. When one looks at the grand palaces of Persepolis and Susa, it is immediately apparent how skillfully multiple architectural styles were blended. Towering columns inspired by Egypt, bas-reliefs bearing the marks of Mesopotamia, and decorative details influenced by Greek art. Persian art of this period was distinguished by motifs such as winged lions, lotuses, and symmetrical designs that symbolized cosmic balance. Against this backdrop, the Jewish community in Yehud, after being allowed to return from Babylon by decree of King Cyrus, began the work of rebuilding the Second Temple and gradually developed their own distinctive artistic style. So, how did Jewish art and architecture in this period reflect the influence of the Persian Empire? The Second Temple, mentioned in the books of Ezra and Haggai, was the greatest spiritual center for the Jewish people. Yet documentation of its actual architectural form is extremely limited. Ancient records directly describing the temple have been lost or destroyed over time. The Old Testament emphasizes only that its construction was supported by the Persians, particularly through materials such as timber from Lebanon, without providing details about its architectural design. What archaeologists have found in Jerusalem and nearby areas like Ramat Rahel consists mainly of small-scale ruins, indicating that structures in Yehud at the time were modest compared to the splendor of Persian palaces. Notably, the motif of the winged lion, a symbol of power in Persian and Mesopotamian art, is almost absent in Jewish remains from this period. This absence may be related to the strict monotheistic teachings of Judaism, which were adamant about avoiding mythical imagery or the glorification of earthly power. Even so, geometric and symmetrical patterns, such as lotuses, spirals, or ornamental borders on pottery, clearly reflect the influence of Persian art. Jewish art and architecture in Yehud were also influenced by intermediary cultures, such as Mesopotamia and Phoenicia. During the Babylonian exile, the Jews were exposed for a long time to Mesopotamian art and brought back to their homeland many characteristic decorative elements. Additionally, Phoenician merchants and officials who worked for the Persians helped spread motifs like the lotus or animal figures to Yehud through trade. Even the Elephantine papyri show a flexibility in adopting local decorative styles, reinforcing the view that Jews in Yehud were open to new influences so long as these did not undermine their core religious beliefs. In general, this artistic synthesis was not only an aesthetic phenomenon, but also a reflection of the Jewish process of integration and adaptation within the multicultural environment of Persian rule. The Jews and the early Persian Silk Road. When speaking of the Achaemenid Empire, one cannot overlook the vast transportation networks that connected regions stretching from Mesopotamia to Egypt. One of the empire's greatest achievements was the Royal Road, which spanned more than 2,500 kilometers, linking the city of Susa in present-day southwestern Iran with Sardis in Asia Minor. Under the guidance of the Persian kings, this system of roads was built and maintained with supply stations and guard posts along the way, serving not only administrative and military needs, but also fostering the growth of trade. Goods such as spices, silk fabrics, and precious metals were transported along these routes, turning Persia into a crossroads of many ancient cultures and economies. Jews were present in all major cities, and some returned to Yehud to help rebuild the Second Temple. With their experience in commerce and their favorable geographic position, Jews had opportunities to participate in trade activities throughout the Persian Empire. Numerous historical and archaeological sources provide some clues about the role of Jews in commerce during the Achaemenid period. The Elephantine Papyri, a collection of documents from the Jewish community in Egypt in the 5th century BC, show that Jews were involved in trading wheat and managing property. Some individuals in this community were recorded as merchants or intermediaries. They knew how to take advantage of Elephantine's strategic position on the Nile to facilitate trade. In Yehud, seals and pottery found at Ramat Rahel indicate trade exchanges with neighboring provinces like Phoenicia. While these findings show that Jews engaged in local trade, there is as yet no clear evidence that they participated in large-scale luxury goods commerce. Archives at Persepolis record the names of many peoples involved in the empire's economic activities, but do not specifically mention Jews. Even so, Jews had a long-standing tradition of commerce, as demonstrated during the days of the Kingdom of Judah, when they traded with Phoenician ports on the Mediterranean. Under Persian rule, the Jewish community could take advantage of the new road networks to exchange goods, and their products were always in demand across the region. Even though the Old Testament does not provide detailed descriptions of trade activity, the prosperity of the Jewish community in Susa suggests that they had the capacity to take part in greater economic endeavors. The reason Jews are rarely mentioned in official Persian records may be that they were not as economically prominent as larger groups like the Medes or Elamites. Inscriptions such as those at Behistun also do not reference Yehud, indicating that the province was not central to trade or politics. Additionally, most Persian administrative documents have been lost, especially local archives. So much evidence of Jewish economic activity has disappeared over time. Nevertheless, the growth of Jewish communities in major cities like Susa and Babylon shows their continued ability to integrate and contribute to the broader economy of the empire. The fate of the First Temple's treasure. Did Persia play a role? In 587 BCE, King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon entered Jerusalem and destroyed the First Temple, which had been built generations earlier by King Solomon. The Babylonian army seized many of the temple's sacred treasures, from golden and silver altars and lampstands to bronze ritual basins. However, one detail has puzzled later generations. The Ark of the Covenant is not specifically mentioned in the lists of looted treasures. Was the Ark hidden away before Jerusalem fell? Some researchers have proposed that, after the conquest of Babylon, the Persians might have taken these treasures to their own capital. The Cyrus Cylinder records that the Persian king returned many religious artifacts to exiled peoples, such as the statue of Marduk, which was restored to the Babylonians. The Book of Ezra goes even further, describing how Cyrus ordered the return of 5,400 gold and silver items that once belonged to the First Temple, allowing the Jewish people to bring them back to Jerusalem. Yet even in this list, there is no mention of the Ark of the Covenant, and Persian sources do not confirm the transfer of such specifically sacred objects. When it comes to the possibility that the Persians kept any of the temple treasures, archaeological records show that the empire managed gold, silver, and spoils of war with great care. However, their policy of religious tolerance often encouraged the return of religious artifacts to subjugated peoples in order to foster loyalty and maintain stability. If the Ark of the Covenant still existed at the time Babylon fell, it is likely it would have been returned, or at least mentioned in historical records, but there is no trace of it in any surviving documents. Some theories suggest the Ark was melted down or hidden away long before this, since even Babylonian records after 587 BCE no longer mention this holy object. On the Jewish side, Later traditions claim that the Ark was hidden beneath the temple, or perhaps even taken as far as Ethiopia before the fall of Jerusalem. But these remain only legends, with no archaeological evidence to support them. Some modern scholars believe that the story of Persia returning the temple treasures, as described in the Book of Ezra, may have been embellished to highlight the role of Cyrus as a divinely chosen savior. In reality, while Persia did practice religious tolerance with conquered peoples, the actual scale and value of the treasures returned to the Jews may not have been as great as the texts describe. If the Jewish people had attempted to reclaim the Ark and failed, it is possible that this episode was omitted from the Hebrew Bible, perhaps to avoid weakening the faith and morale of the community. In summary, Persia may well have returned some of the first temple's treasures, especially items of gold and silver, but there is absolutely no evidence that they ever held or restored the Ark of the Covenant. Most likely, the Ark vanished during the Babylonian era, and the legends surrounding it have become symbols of the enduring hope to preserve the Jewish people's sacred heritage. The role of the Jews in the Persian postal system. Were they involved? When discussing the postal system of the ancient Persian Empire, most modern historians agree that it stands as one of the most remarkable achievements in organization and administration from the ancient world. In the 6th century BCE, kings such as Cyrus the Great and Darius I established a vast network of roads stretching from Susa in Mesopotamia all the way to Sardis in Asia Minor. This royal road measured over 1,500 miles in length and was equipped with numerous way stations known as Shapar Khane. At each stop, staff members would take turns using strong horses to deliver letters and royal decrees to all corners of the empire, often within just a few days. These couriers, called Piradazish, were responsible for ensuring that information from the imperial center could reach even the most distant provinces quickly. Thanks to this system, Persian kings were able to control a vast territory spanning 3 continents, all while maintaining order and authority. Within this diverse empire, the Jewish community stood out as a distinctive group. After the period of Babylonian exile, many Jews settled in major centers such as Yehud, Babylon, and Susa. Their presence has led to questions about what role this community might have played in Persia's communication network. There have been various theories suggesting that Jews, who were often literate and fluent in Aramaic, may have participated in the postal system as couriers, or even as administrative staff in the provinces. However, Persian administrative records have yet to provide clear evidence that Jews ever held official positions within this system. Even so, archaeologists have uncovered some indirect clues that point to Jewish contributions to the management of information and correspondence within the empire's provinces. Papyri discovered at Elephantine indicate that several Jews served as garrison soldiers and participated in administrative activities under the authority of Persian officials. Among them, some individuals are mentioned as messengers or scribes, responsible for relaying correspondence between Elephantine and major centers like Susa and Babylon. Additionally, in Yehud, administrative seals found at Ramat Rahel confirm that Jews were involved in tax and trade management. In major cities such as Babylon and Susa, the Jewish community not only prospered economically, but also played a certain role in local administrative life. They may have supported paperwork, managed warehouses, and even taken part in mail delivery or messaging activities within the Persian postal system. Still, this network was not the exclusive domain of any single ethnic group. Records from Persepolis reveal that, beyond the Persians, many different groups were recruited as administrative staff, couriers, or managers of the postal stations along the royal road. The curse of the Jewish priests in Persia. Thousands of years ago, when the Jewish people were exiled from their homeland after the fall of the Kingdom of Judah, a strange legend quietly took shape within the diaspora community. According to accounts passed down through generations, Jewish priests secretly placed a curse upon the lands that had oppressed their people. This legend claims that the curse was not merely words, but carried supernatural power, powerful enough to affect the fate of mighty kingdoms, such as Babylon. Yet one must ask, was this only a tale born from the pain and hope of a nation in exile? Or is there something real behind the legend, something that truly happened in history? The period of exile in Persia, beginning in the 6th century BCE, was one of the darkest chapters in Jewish history. After Jerusalem fell to King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon, the first temple was destroyed, and thousands of Jews were forced to leave their homes, settling in distant cities such as Susa and Babylon. In these circumstances, the priests became a pillar of strength, helping to preserve cultural and religious identity for generations in exile. In the pages of the Hebrew Bible, especially in books like Ezekiel and Daniel, there are many prophecies and curses directed at Babylon, portraying the downfall of the empire as divine punishment for the invaders. Some Jewish traditions even recall that the priests once performed secret rituals, earnestly praying for retribution against their enemies, though no ancient document has ever confirmed a specific cursing ritual actually conducted in Persia. For ancient Jews, a curse was not merely words but held deep spiritual meaning. In books such as Deuteronomy and Leviticus, one can find stern curses for those who broke the covenant with God, from disease to destruction. In the context of exile, these curses seem to be a way for the priests to inspire faith in divine justice and to help the community hold on to hope of returning home. Many scholars believe that the legend of the Persian curse actually originated from famous prophecies, such as those of Jeremiah, who predicted that Babylon would fall after 70 years. As it happened, Babylon truly did collapse when Cyrus the Great's army captured the city in 539 BCE, a coincidence that led many Jews to believe that the ancient curses had been fulfilled. But whether there was ever a real cursing ritual in history, or if this was simply the way the Jewish people made sense of changing times through faith, remains an open question. Archaeologists and historians have yet to find any material evidence or written record confirming that a special cursing ritual ever took place in Persia. The official records of the Achaemenid Empire, famous for its policy of religious tolerance, do not mention any activity connected to Jewish rituals. Nevertheless, folklore still suggests that Jewish priests might have used secret rites, perhaps drawing on early mystical knowledge of the Kabbalah, to plead for protection or punishment from the Almighty. Some scholars see the story of the curse as a symbol of the power of will and the longing to stand against injustice, helping the Jews endure the suffering of their long exile. Others believe the legend was embellished over time, as later generations sought to honor the priest's spiritual strength by attributing supernatural powers to them. Whether symbolic or holding a grain of historical truth, the legend of the curse of the Jewish priests in Persia continues to intrigue and provoke reflection. This story reminds us of the enduring power of faith during the darkest times, as well as the ability of people to preserve hope and identity even when cast into the harshest circumstances. The role of Jews in the Persian Empire's conquests. When it comes to the role of Jews in the military campaigns of the ancient Persian Empire, historians still puzzle over the true extent of the community's involvement in the vast operations that span the Middle East. According to the accounts of Herodotus, the Persian army of this era included many different ethnic groups, from Medes and Elamites to Babylonians and Phoenicians. The force could number tens of thousands, recruited from across the empire's provinces. Jews, after their exile, settled in centers such as Yehud, Babylon, Susa, and elsewhere. In theory, they were Persian subjects and might have been required to contribute to military efforts, whether by supplying soldiers, materials, or war taxes. However, when examining sources such as the books of Ezra and Nehemiah in the Hebrew Bible, we find no clear information about direct Jewish military involvement. This silence has made their true role in the Persian campaigns a mystery for centuries. The clearest evidence of Jewish military contribution comes from the Elephantine Papyri, a collection of documents about the Jewish community in Egypt in the 5th century BCE. At Elephantine, Jews served as a Persian garrison unit, defending the fortress against threats from Nubia and Egyptian uprisings. They received pay, land, and were organized within the military system, showing deep integration into Persia's defense network. Even so, the Jewish military role at Elephantine appears to have been limited to local defense. There is no evidence that they participated in major imperial campaigns, such as the invasions of Greece or later reconquests of Egypt. This suggests that in other provinces, such as Yehud or Babylon, Jewish involvement in the Persian army, if it happened at all, was minimal or focused on support roles. In Yehud, a small province with a modest population, archaeological findings at Jerusalem and Ramat Rahel show that the area was mainly agricultural and administrative, with no signs of major military installations. The Book of Ezra describes the community as focused on rebuilding the Second Temple, completed in 516 BCE, and does not mention any military obligations. Still, Achaemenid provinces were often required to pay taxes or supply war materials such as timber, wheat, olive oil, or horses. Yehud, located near important trade routes, may have supported military logistics, although no Persian document confirms these details. Royal inscriptions such as Behistun list some provinces as military contributors, but Yehud is absent, probably due to its small size and limited resources. One theory suggests the Jews maintained a neutral stance in Persia's major wars. The Hebrew Bible often praises Persian kings, such as Cyrus and Darius, viewing them as protectors of the Jewish community, but does not mention Jews fighting in campaigns against Greece or other rebellious regions. This may reflect the priorities of Jewish, religious, and political leaders, such as priests or Nehemiah, who focused on preserving religious identity and rebuilding the community, rather than engaging in conflicts that did not directly involve Yehud. In major urban centers like Babylon or Susa, where Jews were deeply integrated into local society, they may have contributed taxes or labor to the military, but did not necessarily serve as soldiers. Persian administrative records from Persepolis mention many peoples paying taxes or supplying labor for the army, but do not specifically identify Jews, perhaps grouping them with the broader Eber-Nari population, the larger Syria-Palestine community. If Jews in Yehud or other provinces contributed only in limited ways, were they at risk of punishment by the Persian court? History shows that Persia responded harshly to rebellious provinces such as Egypt, whose leaders were executed and taxes increased after their defeat in 486 BCE. The Behistun inscription also describes violent suppression during the reign of Darius I. Yet there is no sign that Yehud or Jewish communities ever faced such punishment. In fact, sources such as the Book of Nehemiah mention King Artaxerxes first, supporting the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls. This suggests that Persia maintained a policy of tolerance toward Yehud, likely because it posed little threat to the empire. There are several reasons why Jewish military participation does not appear in official records. First, Yehud was not a military center, and its small population meant it could not provide a large force. Second, many local Achaemenid documents have been lost, as have archives across the empire. Third, the Hebrew Bible focused on faith and community restoration, not military duty, so details about army service are largely absent. Still, the Elephantine evidence shows that Jews could participate in defending key border locations and may have provided logistical support in Yehud or Babylon. Many modern scholars believe that maintaining neutrality or contributing only indirectly was a way for Jews to protect their religious identity and avoid being drawn into conflicts that did not serve their community's interests. The level of integration in major cities like Susa or Babylon also suggests that Jews may have supported Persia through taxes or labor rather than direct combat. The flexible administration of the Achaemenid Empire allowed smaller provinces like Yehud to focus on community development, so long as they remained loyal and did not cause trouble for the royal court. The fate of the Jewish prophets under Persian rule. When considering the fate of Jewish prophets during the era of the Persian Empire, we begin with the pivotal moment of 539 BCE, when Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon. This event opened a new chapter for the Jewish people, as they were granted permission to return to their homeland of Yehud and rebuild the Second Temple, a project completed in 516 BCE. It was in this setting that two prominent prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, emerged, playing crucial roles in uplifting the spirit of the community. They called upon the Jews to unite and overcome adversity, including opposition from the Samaritans, a shortage of resources, and many internal challenges. The Book of Haggai emphasized the importance of prioritizing the rebuilding of the temple, foretelling a prosperous future under God's protection. Meanwhile, Zechariah, with his symbolic visions, inspired faith in Jerusalem's restoration and highlighted the leadership of the priesthood in guiding the people. However, after the time of Haggai and Zechariah, the prophetic tradition, which had once been central to pre-exilic Judaism, began to wane. Later writings, such as Ezra and Nehemiah, do not focus on new prophecies, but instead shift their attention to law and the role of the priestly class. This has raised questions about whether the political changes and administrative practices of the Persian Empire influenced this transformation in Jewish religion. In terms of policy, the Persian Empire, especially under the Achaemenid kings, was renowned for its tolerance toward the religions of conquered peoples. The Cyrus cylinder stands as evidence that Persian kings allowed local communities to maintain their own beliefs. The Book of Ezra even describes how Cyrus and Darius I not only refrained from prohibiting Jewish worship, but actively supported the rebuilding of the Second Temple. Even so, Persia maintained strict control over its provinces, appointing governors to oversee administration and ensure the collection of taxes. Some scholars have hypothesized that the Persians would not have encouraged prophetic activities that were provocative or could threaten social order. Haggai and Zechariah, while urging the reconstruction of the temple, did not oppose Persian rule. On the contrary, they stressed cooperation with imperial officials, such as Zerubbabel. This suggests that the prophets adapted their messages to avoid conflict with authorities, thus securing the survival of their community. Nevertheless, there are no Persian sources, such as inscriptions from Persepolis, that document direct control over the prophets, so this influence may have occurred only indirectly through the elevation of priests-in-law in the governance of Yehud. From within the Jewish community, the declining role of prophecy also reflected profound changes after the exile. Faced with a crisis of identity and the need to restore faith, priests like Ezra directed the community's focus to the Torah, viewing it as the ultimate guide for religious and social life. The Book of Malachi, considered the last prophet of this era, also criticized the moral decline of the priesthood, though his words lacked the force and inspiration of his predecessors. Once the Second Temple was completed, the Jewish community gradually shifted its emphasis to maintaining law, ritual, and order, rather than seeking new prophetic revelations. The Persian administrative system appeared to support this trend, as priests were easier to coordinate and control than prophets, who might deliver unpredictable or controversial messages. Regarding the possibility of contact with other religious traditions, Jews living under Persian rule certainly encountered the Magi, the Zoroastrian priesthood, and the spiritual leaders of the empire. Unlike Judaism, Zoroastrianism did not have a prophetic tradition but placed great emphasis on ritual, astrology, and the reading of omens. Herodotus once described the Magi as those who performed prayers, watched the skies for signs, and played important roles in religious ceremonies at the royal court. Jews living in cities like Susa or Babylon likely interacted with the Magi through commerce or administration. Certain Zoroastrian concepts, such as angels, demons, and the Day of Judgment, share similarities with ideas that appear in books like Zechariah and Daniel, suggesting the possibility of indirect influence or intellectual exchange between the two religions. For instance, Zechariah's visions of angels and Satan bear striking resemblance to supernatural entities in Zoroastrian belief, though no record exists of direct dialogue between Jewish priests and the Magi. If such influence occurred, it was more likely the result of cultural interaction than formal religious exchange. Despite these contacts with various cultures, the Jewish prophets retained their core identity. Haggai and Zechariah consistently focused on the restoration of Jerusalem and affirmed the role of Yahweh, never adopting the polytheistic elements or fire rituals of Zoroastrianism. The parallels between the two faiths may simply reflect parallel developments, as both grappled with questions of good, evil, and human destiny during times of upheaval. In Yehud, priests and prophets maintained strict religious boundaries to safeguard monotheistic foundations. The visions of Zechariah, though at times similar to Persian astrology, were always interpreted through the lens of Jewish theology, with a deep belief that God remained at the center of history. Archaeological evidence in Yehud, such as finds at Ramat Rahel, depicts a stable society under Persian rule without signs of religious oppression. Persian inscriptions do not mention Jewish prophets, perhaps because Yehud was just a small province within the vast empire. Many scholars believe that the decline of prophecy was primarily the result of internal transformation within the Jewish community after the exile, as the role of priests and the Torah gradually supplanted the central place once held by the prophets. Persia, though not directly intervening, may have reinforced this trend by favoring religious leaders who were easier to govern. If Zoroastrian influence existed, it only affected certain theological concepts and did not alter the essential message of the Jewish prophets. Thank you for joining me in exploring the Today Mysteries. If you enjoyed these strange and fascinating stories, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on our next adventures together.